gap and the gain. And I don't know if you guys read the intro and chapter 1, or if you just read chapter 1.
I read the intro and I'm almost through chapter 1.
So I started with the intro and I thought, like, I can't tell you how many times I like looked at my phone. I'm like, did I open a book or a podcast? Because at first I thought it was a podcast, but then I just realized that the dialogue was kind of going back and forth. But it was a very interesting setup, and I actually liked the intro.
Right. I did too.
Yeah. I did too, because I think it gave a very clear vision of what the gap in the gain was without giving away too many of the details that he kind of starts going into in each of the chapters. So I wrote down, being in the gap makes you a bully, wanting people to be where you want them to be. So that was kind of his intro into the gap and the gain. That's kind of what I took away after listening to that. So what is your takeaway from there? What do you guys kind of think about the intro, and what do you think about where the book's headed and how it might help you guys?
Well, I think that like the idea of it is something like you've always had, like I've always had that in my back of my mind, that like it's always like it's about the journey, it's not about the destination. You know what I mean? Like, especially in real estate. I mean, are we ever going to get there? Wherever the magical there is, we're never going to get there. We're always going to be, like, me personally, I'm always like, I look back on last year and I'm like, man, I'm so pissed off because there's so many things that I didn't do. And my wife has to pull me aside and say, you know, you moron, you did this, and this. Like, you never were doing that like 2 years ago. I was like, all right, that's a good point. Like, but I'm still so, but that never had a name. And I think it's really cool that he has like a name and an explanation for it. And I think that, you know, I think that that's cool. I think that, and it makes sense. I think we all deal with that, you know?
Absolutely. So, the first quote, the one that you just kind of opened up with. So, I'm not gonna lie. The first time I was reading it, I think I wasn't really ready to hear it yet, and so I started listening more and more and started really understanding. And so now hearing it again, I'm like, wow, that is a very like it's like the visualization of kind of it's almost like just a shift in doing things, a shift in heart set, a shift in soul set, whatever, however you want to look at it. It's like, okay, well, you've got the gap and you've got the gain. You're sitting over here at the gap, you're the bully because you're pulling everybody else back into the gap because you're almost unaware that the gap is kind of almost kind of causing those problems. You know, it's like just switch over to the game, like be, you know, gratitude. You know,
Right.
so yeah, it was just it's almost like the way it was presented. Like that first quote, I think I missed it the first time because I wasn't ready to hear it, but now hearing it again, it means something completely different.
Right. Well, to me, it goes back to my favorite quote, right? Change the way you look at things, and the things you look at change. Get out of the gap and get into the gain, and all of a sudden, you know, you're having a different perspective on things. I don't know if you guys use this in sales, but Steve, when I read this, I went, holy shit, that's how you get your clients across the finish line. Like, that's the definition of getting these people across the finish line. It was like, oh, I understand what I'm doing now, and I actually understand the purpose. So now I know what the win is and what the lose is, and I know how to get to the win. It was like with these buyers right now, I don't know about your first time home buyers, they don't want to buy, right? They don't want that house.
And I've got a seller, like, over the weekend, we were doing this. We were back and forth because she didn't want to give away anything, like anything. I'm like, Mary, God bless you. I love you to death. We got to give something. You have a 30-something-year-old house. And I finally had to go to play the card of, look, you want to get to the lake. You want to be done, don't you? Like, this is it. We've been trying to do this for months. This is the off ramp, baby. But I think all sales is about pain. Mm-hmm. It's all pain relief. And we have to remind our people of the pain that we're relieving. You know, we have to, which I don't know if that's quite the gap in the gain thing, but there is a gain, you know, by doing things. And we have to keep that front and center with them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was such a cool realization. I was like, oh, that's the secret to sales.
Yep.
Right there. You want to know the secret to sales? It's right there. Watch our book club, read this book. You'll if you can put the two and connect the dots, You will definitely put that together and be amazing at sales. So anyway, so as he kind of continues, that was kind of, in my opinion, that was kind of the overview of the intro. I don't want to spend too much time on it because I think the first chapter was kind of cool. So in the first chapter, he talks about the gap being the negative space and the gain being the positive space. And the first emotion that he drives that to is happiness, right? That being in the gain is actually where you're happy. When you're the swimmer and you say, oh, who cares if I don't win? I'm just happy to swim. All of a sudden you break records and win your Olympic gold, as opposed to being in the game, in the gap, where you're like, oh, I have to win. I want to win. That's the only answer. That's the only thing that'll make me happy. And you're consistently chasing what you think is happy. What did that realization do to you guys, or how does that apply to your life, or how did that kind of play an effect on you as you were reading through that part of the emotion part of the definition of that?
You want to go first? You go first. Good. I want to be sure.
I'm going to take a stab at it. So basically, I think during that point, he was also kind of making a lot of relations to like sports. And so he kind of talked about like being in the zone. I did do sports. I wasn't really that big into sports. I was more into music at the exact same zone. And so it's funny because as a kid, I never really knew what put me in the zone and what didn't put me in the zone. And generally, I wasn't in the zone because I was so critical of myself. So, like, especially with practicing, you can't get in the zone practicing because you're just sitting there criticizing yourself. But, then he kind of talked about, that example of, what was it, the swimmer? And so, they kind of go from, oh, no, it wasn't a swimmer. I forgot. So
he was an
basically,
athlete.
he said something, and he had to like clarify himself on Twitter, and he was saying, I'm not saying I don't take this seriously. What I'm saying is I see it differently from you guys, and so when you're in the zone, you're not really critical because it's just like it's very similar to meditation where you get to that like point of the now, and you're kind of focused on like really just observing thoughts and kind of moving them aside so you can focus. It's almost like he's explaining that, and then like kind of explaining the gap in the game. It was just something about how he explained that and me relating it to like when I was doing music. The only time I was ever in the moment is when I was like focused on, oh man, this is a really fun song to play, or oh, I just want to play this because I want them to hear it, as opposed to, oh, I got to play it for a bunch of fun of like in front of a bunch of folks. I gotta not miss the third line. I gotta make sure I do this note right. I'm not in the zone at that point because I'm in the gap, and you can't get in the zone in the gap, and you do your best work in the zone. But you got to be in the game to be in the zone.
Right. As realtors, for us, the hardest thing for us is like, obviously the big payday for us is payday. It's going to closing. Nothing we did on closing day led to a closing. Like everything that we did 3 months prior led to the closing. And sometimes it's like you have a day where it sucks. It sucks ass. Okay. It's awful. But the reality is you probably had a phone call in there that planted a seed. You probably had something like that. So like anytime since I got into sales and been in real estate, I've really made it a point of you have to have a checklist of I need to get all this stuff done. And even in the worst day where you get MRF'd on the phone or whatever, you still check the boxes, make the phone calls, whatever, because that's all you can do. I can't control decisions people make. I can't control anything. All I can control is what we do. And so that kind of I think that helps you stay out of the gap and just say, look, I can't worry about, you can have a day where you go to closing, you have a crap day because you make any phone calls. Because you spent 8 hours like being excited because you got a, big check in your hand. Like that was a terrible day in retrospect, because you didn't do anything. And sometimes the worst days can be the best days. So it's like, you have to just keep that in mind that all you can do is you have to just keep plowing forward, and keep building for tomorrow.
Right. Right. For me, I think it was a permission of being given the ability to just be happy. right?
Mhm.
Like I think a lot of us kind of look for happiness and things we achieve, to your point, Steve. You know, what are we doing tomorrow? What are we doing tomorrow? Where's our checklist? Where's our checklist? But to me, it was just here's permission to just be happy. Just put a smile on your face and be happy in the shoes and the body you're in right now. And I don't know, it was just a good definition of that for me. Just because I think a lot of times it's like you lay down at night and you're like, am I happy? Am I not happy? What makes me happy? What am I chasing? Why am I chasing it? Why am I doing it? Because we all work hard. Like
Right.
not anybody on this call is sitting down watching TV for 4 or 5 hours a day, or, you know, jet setting off in a plane right now and enjoying 4 weeks off. Like we all work our asses
That'd
off.
be nice.
Hey, we'll be there. Listen, one day.
One
Oh,
day we're taking
absolutely,
over,
absolutely.
baby.
We're taking over the world one house at a time. I promise y'all. Like that's so we will be jet setting one day, but we're not there yet. And
Mhm.
I think for people in our shoes, it does feel like a rat race, and it does feel like you're always chasing that happy. And it was just a nice, hey, just be happy, because catching that's not going to get it. Right. Right.
Because again, like I said earlier, it's like that always changes.
Yeah.
Like when your first year in real estate, what were your goals? They're not the goals you have now. You know what I mean?
I wanted to sell a house and survive.
Right.
I wanted to make more than I was making. I was only making $19,000. It didn't,
Oh wow.
have a big reach. That yes.
So funny comment I just thought of, like when you were talking about watching TV for 4 hours. So I'm in the middle of a tax CPE and it's 3.5 hours. And that was the first thing I thought of. I was like, this is actually the most, like the least like intensive thing I've done all week. I feel like I'm watching TV for 4 hours. So
And you just be happy.
yep. Oh, absolutely. I'm enjoying it as much as I can.
I love it. I love it. I love it. So to your point, kind of brings me to the next emotion he brings us through in this chapter. Was you just said, David, that we do our best work when we're in the zone. And he kind of talks about it being, you know, the gap being obsessive and the gain being harmonious. So how do you guys kind of apply that to your lives? Like, you know, from that perspective, what does that feel like to you guys when you're looking at it from a harmonious and a obsessive factor? Do you guys find yourselves obsessing about things more than you should?
Um, Actually, so I would say over the past maybe 5 years in my career, I've kind of made more of a shift towards like, because obviously it wasn't as clear as the gap in the game, but like the gap I've kind of recognized over the years, like, okay, let's transition this out. This makes me uncomfortable. Like, I don't like this. And so one thing I've noticed, especially in my career, is so sometimes I would get a little obsessive about things. And it's like, a lot of the times, like it wouldn't even turn out. I would think, oh, wow, I'm obsessive. I'm like working more, I'm putting more in. And you would think, oh, awesome. David's working late hours. He's doing all this stuff. And it's just like, well, I mean, why are you putting in that much work? Why are you billing so much time? Like, why are you doing it? And so it's just like the obsession doesn't always, it never always work. But then the more I kind of move towards, kind of getting away from being so critical, I felt a little less need to be obsessive. So I feel like that relation kind of now almost explains it a little bit. It's like, okay, well, maybe I'm feeling less of the need to obsess because I'm no longer being so critical that I have to overcompensate.
So for me, I think that now I'm about to be 6 years in real estate. It's different now than it was 6 years ago in that I know if I do X, 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 Y is going to happen. You know what I mean? And like, it's all good. You plant the seeds, they grow. You plant the seeds, they grow. It's going to happen. Like in the beginning, there is that obsession, I guess, when you're in that gap and you don't know that things are going to work. And I don't know, I would bring it home a little bit sometimes. I think being pissed off or mad because things weren't happening at the speed I wanted them to and things like that. I think that the more that I've done it, I've learned that it's okay. I may not have a closing for a month, because of the way the cycle works or whatever, and it's fine. You keep plowing, you keep doing it, and it's all going to work out, and you're going to get 6 closings the next month. It all works out. So I think that's where the harmony probably comes from. And for me, I think it's you have to have harmony with not only the business, but also then your faith and your family and everything too. And that's my thing that I focus on is, I can't be the husband and the father I need to be if I'm wallowed in the crap, and moaning and groaning about, getting them effort all the time.
Right. Right. So for me, that was a hard one because like my favorite book is Be Obsessed or Be Average.
Well, I like that.
So my brain started having like war. It's like, wait a second. What my idol says, I don't know you yet.
But I think that's cool though, because I think so what, but like, I get the word obsessed, but I could see where the obsession is with growth and with,
Sure. So for me, it went back to the be happy. So I think where obsession goes from where a passion goes to an obsession is where you go from the gain to the gap and you go from happy to not happy and chasing.
Right.
And so that was kind of, I think that gave me a weight, right? A scale, something to measure, which was nice. Right. So I think Grant Cardone needs to be changing his book title. Because I think obsession is not the best word, actually, after kind of having that definition or that scale placed on there.
Now, it's funny though, because you could almost make the argument that sometimes you need to be pissed off sometimes. If you come off the rails a little bit and whatever, and maybe you do need to get obsessed and maybe have like 1 week of just tell me, you know what? I'm locking the door. Don't come in here. I'm making 5,000 phone calls. I'm yelling at people. I'm throwing crap. It's time to go. I'm ticked off. I'm obsessed. But sometimes you got to do that to get back on the rails. You know what I mean? As long as you know that that's where you're going, I guess.
Yeah, I think that balance would kind of help with that too. Because I mean, to your point, Steve, things are situational. Sometimes you are upset. Just got to put some food on the table.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and I think in the book, in the at least in the first chapter, he kind of talks in I don't know if he explains, but I kind of took away that, I think as humans, we are expected to live in the gap. I think you are cognitively in the game, right?
Right.
Because I think the gap is probably where fight or flight actually happens.
Right.
And that's how we survive. So I don't necessarily think being in the gap is a bad thing. To your point, Steve, I think there's a need for it. I think it's balance.
Right.
Right. It's how do we balance the two? How do we make sure that we're not chasing happy? We are happy. How do we make sure that our actions are harmonious and not obsessive? Right. Because it's true, like if you go back to Grant Cardone's book, he talks about how people are like, oh, you shouldn't do that. You shouldn't be that obsessive. You're going to get burned out. Well, he never got burned out, but I don't think he ever made it to the gap. Like, I think that was really his focus, and he didn't care who he hurt or who he lost or, whatever's whatever. That was his focus. So I think there is a healthy level. Is his healthy? I don't know.
So one thing I just thought of, I kind of like the gap in the game as a visualization from the standpoint as a guidance that almost kind of defines the pursuit of happiness, because that's kind of what he talks about is the pursuit of happiness. And so in all honesty, if you think about psychology, you can't maintain a state of happiness forever because you'll forget what it feels like. So there are times where you're going to have to, I guess if you really think about it, be in the gap. But I think the visualization is a really good guide for you to be able to say, hey, look, I've been in the gap too long.
Right.
It's time for me to re-up on what the game feels like. Like, let's get back in the zone. So I think there is some like as we kind of talk through it, I think there's some gray area with the
Right.
obsession, but I think it's a really good, like almost like a guide. And if you really look at it from that standpoint, it makes it a little easier, I think.
Yes, no, I absolutely, absolutely, absolutely agree. So that kind of brought me to the end of my notes, really. In the chapter, I have gap means you have needs, gains means you are in the game. That was kind of my last little note or whatever. But do you guys have any last takeaways? And do you think you are going to be more cognizant of being in each position in your lives now? Do you think that's going to be like, are you going to be more cognizant and moving forward and being in the gap in the game?
I just, like I said, I like the fact that it has a name now, you know, and it's not just, I think it was one of my old team leaders. It was always, the old bold adage, you get comfortable being uncomfortable. You know what I mean? It's like we're on a journey. It's like, and that's the win, is that we're on the journey. It does, because we're never going to get there. So we're always going to be building and growing and whatever. And that's where we have to be. So I like the fact that it kind of has a name now.
Yes.
Honestly, it took the words out of my mouth.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Like the whole first chapter is like, oh, there's a scale and there's a definition. Like, and it's okay to be happy and it's okay to be here. And you just got to kind of balance it all out. So awesome. I don't know if we've not been recording for long or why our countdown hasn't popped up, but I know it normally does about 1 o'clock. So anyway, chapter 2 is 42 minutes. Chapter 3 is 54 minutes. Do we want to try to do both for next week?
Yeah.
Sounds good to me.
Perfect. All right. So chapters 2 and chapters 3. And hopefully I moved everything over to my computer properly. And after we hang up, our recording pops up magically like it always does. If not, I'll call you.